I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. I do not know why Trump planned to go to Puerto Rico. I could not fathom where he thought he was going to find his sleazy victory lap photo op, except in a dry, well-lit, air-conditioned hangar full of food and water miles from any devastation. But moreover, I do not know why he would go and pretend to care. It is now clear, it is inarguable, it is inescapable that he hates the Puerto Ricans. He spent the weekend making the plight of the Americans devastated there about him, just as he spent the end of last week making the plight of an American community larger than 21 states, not about recovery, but about making two barely concealed threats that rebuilding Puerto Rico will not take place until Puerto Rico answers to the banks and Wall Street, as if he were not the president of the United States, but the president of corporations, or the president of the economy, or the president of money. To process that which cannot be understood, an American president prioritizing himself and the banks and Wall Street ahead of a dying American community that's bigger than Chicago or Philadelphia or Houston and Dallas, that's nearly Houston and Dallas combined, to begin to conceive of the mental illness that leads anybody to think that way, one must examine one sad truth about Donald Trump and when and where he came from. I was born and grew up in the metropolitan New York City area 13 years after Trump was born here, and from the people of his era, from his places like Queens or the Bronx and even the suburbs, the message to us children of the 60s, from him and the other children of the 30s and the 40s, was direct and rarely even hidden. The New York City in which they grew up had been ruined, they insisted, by the Puerto Ricans. In 1940, there were 61,000 Puerto Ricans in New York City. By 1960, it was 612,000. By 1970, it was 817,000. Look at the cultural landmarks from that time. The touching 1957 musical West Side Story is the reimagining of Romeo and Juliet. Only Romeo is a member of a white gang in Manhattan, and the men in Juliet's life are all members of the Puerto Rican gang. The classic movie 12 Angry Men from the same year carries both a plea against prejudice against Puerto Ricans in New York and some of the most virulent examples of bigoted language you will ever hear. Quote, "Look, you know how these people lie," says the character played by Ed Begley Sr. about Puerto Ricans. Quote, "It's born in them. They don't know what the truth is, and let me tell you, they don't need any real big reason to kill someone either. They get drunk, they're real big drinkers, all of them, and bang, someone's lying in the gutter. Nobody's blaming them for it. That's how they are by nature. You know what I mean. Violent. Human life doesn't mean as much to them as it does to us," end quote. When I heard that film dialogue for the first time as a child, I flinched, because I heard language like that in the suburbs of New York City and in New York City itself in the 1970s. And I heard it from people, adults, who considered themselves liberal and without prejudice. And I heard it in public, in places like Yankee Stadium, where adults could hear it said, and where, to my horror and shame, nobody except my parents acted like it was wrong. Except those other adults didn't even call them Puerto Ricans. That hatred, that very specific, very regional, very intense prejudice and bigotry and hatred is what surrounded Donald Trump as a child. Donald Trump, who had clearly already begun life without human empathy, whose hatred and prejudice towards other groups has been so evident with such disastrous consequences with the wall and the brutality of the ICE raids and Charlottesville. Given his illnesses and where and when he was raised, his attitude specifically towards Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans may be even worse than all the others. It certainly dovetails with the 2008 interview with Howard Stern, recovered and posted last week by a man named Bill Frischling at the site FactBase. It was Trump telling the story of hosting a $100,000 a table fundraiser, the Red Cross Ball, at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Quoting what he told Stern, "A man about 80 years old, very wealthy man, a lot of people didn't like him. He fell off the stage. So what happens is this guy falls off right on his face, hits his head, and I thought he died. And you know what I did? I said, 'Oh my God, that's disgusting,' and I turned away. I couldn't, he was right in front of me, and I turned away. I didn't want to touch him. He's bleeding all over the place. I felt terrible. Beautiful marble floor. Didn't look so good. It changed color, became very red. I was saying, Get that blood cleaned up. It's disgusting. The next day, I forgot to call the man to see he's okay. It's just not my thing. And that man wasn't Puerto Rican. Sunday, John Dickerson of CBS asked Speaker Paul Ryan about Trump and race. I do really believe, Ryan said, his heart's in the right place. There is no heart. Thus, for Puerto Rico, there is no hope. Resist, remove, peace. My book, based on more than 100 of these commentaries, will be available shortly. There will also be an audio version. It will be about 20 hours long.